Welcome on in everyone and welcome to the Cup of Tea channel. So this week we just had our Campfire Chat talking all things itemization changes, class updates, as well as some end game coming towards season 4, as well as some PTR news. Overall, the Campfire Chat I would say was a success, apart from the odd crash.
Let's take a look at some of the weapon ones that we can attach on. So here we've got ones that...
And with this video I want to talk about... Hold on a second.
Oh my.
Anyway, as I was saying, this is going to be a quick video talking about what was discussed during the Campfire Chat. So without further ado, let's get started. So first things first, let's talk about the PTR, the public test realm. This is going to allow players to have early access to the itemization changes, the class updates, and everything like that before the official release of Season 4. This will only be accessible for players that have it on PC and using the Battle.net client. Console players unfortunately will not be able to test this out, but they did say in the future, with future update PTRs and everything like that, they are looking into allowing console players to have a go at that. But this is going to be accessible from the 2nd of April for an entire week, so until April the 9th. And this brings the question, will we be able to provide the feedback and for them to actually provide the updates with these changes in time before Season 4? Well, they did mention in the Campfire Chat that they are planning to extend Season 3 up until May 14th. I know the community may not be happy to hear that, but Season 4 will release on May 14th as well. They've given us a confirmation date for that, and I feel like this is the necessary step that they need to take, as we saw with Season 3 and the gauntlet delays and a lot of hassle that it did cause, and it left a very bad taste for the community. So I feel like this is the necessary steps that they need to do to make sure the product is right on release, rather than down the line mid-season where everyone's already like moving on to maybe some other games. But back to the PTR, when you do hop onto this, you will all start from level 1. However, they're providing services where you'll be able to reach max level very quickly, because they want players to be able to reach that end game content and test out and provide feedback, and you don't want to be spending the entire week just leveling. So in addition to that, all your glyphs are going to be max leveled out as well. All locations discovered also, and the campaign is completed. The only thing you would need to really complete if you haven't done so is the renown. That is copied over from your character on your actual main account. Legendaries are actually going to be receiving a double drop rate as well, so if you're trying to start or try some builds out during the PTR, this is a good opportunity to actually do so. And that pretty much covers everything to do with the PTR. Next, I actually want to talk about the itemization changes. This is the big update that's coming into the game, which pretty much changes the way a lot of players are going to be playing the game. This is going to definitely improve the aspects in terms of your leveling experience, but also how you design and customize your builds. We might see a little bit more variety when it comes to the uniques that you're using, what stats you go into, but also the skills and abilities you use also, and how they work in conjunction. So probably one of the first things you're going to notice with the itemization changes is to do with the affix pools on the items. And what I mean by that is they've actually removed a lot of the ones we're used to seeing that are based on certain conditions. For example, damage to injured enemies or damage to shadow damage over time affected enemies. Now they've actually reduced the cooldown, and they're going to be giving you a lot more raw stat increases, and this is going to help with power spikes, but also allow you to basically understand what's going to be contributed once you use that item or stat. You know it's going to be contributing to at least something in terms of a defense or an offense. Is a lot more simplified. And another addition in terms of changes is reducing the number of affixes that items actually receive on them. So beforehand, legendaries would actually have 4 affix slots. This time round, they're going from 4 down to 3, and when it comes to your rare items, instead of 4, these will roll 2 instead. And there is a reason why they have done this. We are being introduced to a new crafting system, one of the new crafting systems that's coming into Season 4, which is known as tempering. So as mentioned before, your legendaries are going to have 1 less affix slot. Temper is going to allow you to add 2 new random affixes, very similar to how Last Epoch works with their crafting system, and you'll be collecting manuals as you play through Diablo 4, so there's no actual set specific target farming. You don't need to go out your way to try and collect the specific one. As you play through Diablo 4, you'll be collecting these manuals, to which you'll go to the blacksmith and open up the tempering UI, slot the weapon in, and depending what category it's eligible for, such as weapons, offensive, defensive, Once you place that in and then select the recipe that you want, you have a 1 in 4 chance to roll that potential stat with that number. And then as you notice on the item as well, you actually have something called temper durability remaining. And these are the amount of attempts you can actually try and reroll to try and get that desired stat that you want for the item. And that is a major section in terms of the itemization changes. So even though it still is a little bit on the RNG side, you can definitely have a bit more control in terms of rolling stats for the items, but also the stats that you're rolling are going to be a lot more impactful in terms of the way that you're building your class. But in addition, they've also applied some quality of life changes in terms of not over cluttering your inventory, which was a major issue, and a lot of players were asking for a loot filter system. Even though this is not the direction that they're going towards, they have said that they're actually wanting to go more the direction of quality over quantity. And what they've done to actually work on this is, for example, when it's world tier 3, you're only going to be receiving sacred items with those affixes that are more desirable. But in addition, when it comes to world tier 4, you're only going to be receiving the ancestral variations of rare items. And alongside that, they actually have reduced the amount of items that drop as you are playing the game. So normally when you complete a dungeon, you end up completely filling out your inventory and you have to take a trip back and salvage or sell the items to actually create more space. Or also your actual stash tab, that normally fills up rather quickly as you're progressing through the game or the season. Now they're actually going to be reducing the item drops, so you're more likely to pick up an item that's actually going to have a lot more impact towards your build. It's more likely to be an improvement or an item to be desired. So this next section somewhat ties with the stash and inventory spacing, and that is the Codex of Power. This is a new reworked UI system. So beforehand, what would happen was when you had a legendary with an aspect or an effect that would really help your build out, and it was a max roll, you would essentially store it in your inventory or stash space before you found the right rare to then put that legendary effect onto it. When you took it to the occultist and then extracted that legendary effect, it would essentially destroy that legendary and keep the effect. But you only had one use of this, so you really had to make sure that you had the right item to put this legendary effect on. Now with the updated Codex of Power, the legendary aspect that you extract from the item will now be stored within this system, and you can use this as many times as you want on as many items as you desire. And this time around, when it comes to the aspects, it's not a limited number. This is every single aspect that you can obtain can now be placed within the Codex of Power. And furthermore, you may notice the ranking numbers next to these aspects as well. This is a whole new progression system to which whichever higher one that you have, that will give you an indication of how close you are to the maximum rolled number. But they've also changed it to where if you're on the original world tier 1, you will not be able to get the max roll immediately. Once you get to world tier 3, that will give you a higher number, but only to a set cap. And then obviously world tier 4 is where you can have that potential to get that max roll. But once you've unlocked that max cap, that will always be forever in the Codex of Power. So you will always be able to apply the strongest version of the aspect on your items. But going back to the previous slide with the additional updates with items not dropping as much, you may be concerned with, am I going to be able to obtain the right amount of resources to be able to do my crafting and resource making? So they are going to be retuning and still providing you the right amount of materials needed for your crafting, so you're still not going to be missing out. It's just basically less time wasted trying to obtain them. And to further enhance it as well, they're actually going to be reducing the variety of materials that you need. Monster parts, herbs as well. So rather than having to get a set specific amount, they're going to be basically crammed down into one resource of common herbs, but still having to farm the rarer materials. So if you want those stronger versions of the elixirs, that will still need to be required to be farmed, but it's a lot more simplified as well, so you're not having to waste time resource gathering. And they've actually brought in more ways you can actually farm your forgotten souls as well, a very desired material when it comes to recrafting or re-rolling stats to your gear or upgrading. This time around, you can actually obtain these through completing whispers, but also when you slay elites, they will have a chance to actually drop these forgotten souls also. Gems have also received some changes as well, because when it comes to dual crafting, when you place it into an item, there's always that one stat that we all seek after. The other ones that were offered with the gems weren't really substantial. They didn't really mean anything. So very similar to items with the affix pool being decreased, they've done the same thing with gems itself, but also offered more raw stats, so you can actually obtain intelligence, strength, dexterity stats from those gems as well. Now before we move on to the next section, the last thing I want to talk about with the base item changes is to do with legendaries itself. So when you slay a monster of level 95 plus, when it drops a legendary, this is guaranteed to be a 925 item level. And this was a change that they were trying to implement for quite some time but didn't know quite how to, because beforehand the only way to efficiently get 925 rare items or legendaries was by farming Uber Duriel, but to get that you had to farm all these living steals from the Hell Ties. So actually implementing ways to get 925 legendaries just through playing the actual game once you hit that more end game kind of leveling, this is definitely going to help improve players finding that item that they want for their build. And speaking about finding the legendary that you need, you can actually finally trade legendaries between players now. Yes, if you manage to find a legendary that you think would actually have a lot of value to someone else, you can now trade this to them, whether it be your friend or if you're looking to make some gold. But in addition, if yourself, you're trying to find a certain legendary that has the stats or affix that you need, you can now put this up in the trade chat and hopefully someone will be able to hit you up and provide you with what you need. Just bear in mind, if this item or legendary has been re-rolled, you won't be able to trade it because it will be account bound. As long as it's there in its vanilla state, you can actually trade these between players. And a new feature is coming along the way for those ancestral legendaries and ancestral unique items, and this is something known as greater affixes. What this essentially is when it drops on the ground, you will see with an indication some Roman numerals. This basically implies how many of those affixes have rolled into a greater affix. And what this essentially is a 1.5 times multiplier to the max roll. So if we take, for example, a stat that rolled 100% or something, this will automatically become 150%. And then if you think about uniques and the stats that they can actually roll, that's going to actually provide you with some pretty insane numbers. And I'm sure if we see one of these greater affixes drop on the ground, that's definitely going to give you that dopamine rush that a lot of players enjoy when playing ARPGs. And now we have another crafting system being introduced to season 4 known as Masterworking. This is more on the end game aspect of the game, and this is where you can take an item and rank it up 12 times, and each rank will actually provide a small stat bump to every single affix, but every 4th rank at random, one of the affixes can actually receive a large bump in terms of its stats, and this can essentially happen 3 times over those 12 ranks. This can either be divided between the affixes, or one affix can receive all 3 of those large bumps, meaning you can come up with some pretty crazy combinations.
Bone spears everywhere.
Yes. Absolutely.
And then this brings up the question, what materials do I need to do my masterworking? Well, there's a new bit of content coming in known as the Artificer's Pit, or the Pit for short, and this is very similar to how Greater Rifts were in Diablo 3 or the Abattoir of Zir, where you have a set dungeon and a boss at the end with a timer. And even if you make it to the end not within the time, it won't lock you out of the pit. You can still complete it and receive some rewards, but it basically just doesn't allow you to collect the masterworking materials. But how do you get around to actually trying out the pit? Well, once you complete a level 45 nightmare dungeon, you are given a quest in which you will collect these rune shards, and these are the resources to be able to open up one of these pit runs. But these can also be collected just by completing dungeons, slaying monsters, everything that you just normally do, you'll receive rune shards anyway, so you don't have to take a detour to specifically farm these materials to then have access to the pit. And in this image here, you may notice an item known as Stygian Stone. This is a new resource in which you can actually summon high level versions of the ladder bosses, and with it come great rewards. For example, you can earn actually Resplendent Sparks by defeating for the first time the level 200 versions of these bosses. So this is a great way to actually start obtaining uber uniques rather than just relying on Duriel. And speaking of ladder bosses, we actually have a new challenger, or a fan favorite should I say, returning back into Diablo 4, and this is Anduriel. The way to summon Anduriel will be collecting the parts from the Beast in Ice and Lord Zir, other ladder bosses that we are already familiar with. But in addition, this is a great way to actually obtain some uber uniques as well, because it shares the same drop table as Duriel himself. And this was a great move for the developers, because it's not just collecting the eggs and shards specifically for Duriel. We now have some value coming out from the Beast in Ice as well as Lord Zir, collecting those components to be able to summon Anduriel, and then still having that chance to get uber uniques not just from Duriel. We have a bit more options and variety as well. Helltides are also receiving a buff as well. Not only can we access these now from World Tier 1 and 2, but furthermore, if you notice a slight change, we now have a gauge meter. This is very similar to how Blood Harvest worked back in Season 2, where if you slayed a certain amount of enemies, you would then spawn these Bloodseekers for greater rewards. This time round, we now have the threat meter, so when we kill enough monsters, it will spawn in a minion called a Hellborn, and this will actually, once slain, drop you a Blood Vial, which is the resource required to actually summon Lord Zir. So this is actually going to give us more value when we're actually partaking in the Hell Ties. Not only are we collecting our living steel, we're actually getting more materials for other ladder bosses as well. And now onto the final section of this video. We have covered quite a lot, so I appreciate you guys sticking around with me, but this section is all to do with the class changes. So we're not going to delve too much into what they're going to do specifically, but more a direction that they're going to be going towards for season 4 with the updates and changes, but also the changes with certain items. First things off, when it comes to uniques, beforehand we would receive 5 in total. This time around they're planning to release 10 uniques, and the way this could work is either 2 uniques for each class or 1 per class, and then 5 general uniques. But in addition, they're actually planning on releasing a new uber unique known as Tyrael's Might. They're also updating existing designs to make it a lot more flexible for players with their builds. So for example, with the Azure Watch, your core skills could have up to a 20% chance to freeze the enemies and then they would take cold damage. Now they've changed it, rather than being core skills, to actually be all your skills. And they've also applied some changes to already existing aspects, making them a lot more viable for potentially new builds. For example, with the Barbarian's double swing and the Dust Devils that it summons, or with the Rogue as it breaks or enters stealth, dropping a grenade and also increasing its grenade damage. Flat damage is also getting an increase on items as well. So what happened beforehand is when you had a legendary with an aspect, it would do a set amount of damage, and if you were seeking for a higher base amount of damage as you leveled up, you would actually have to farm for a new item. This time round, it's actually going to scale with your weapon damage. So the more damage your weapon does, the more these flat scale damages will actually put out. Not only are aspects or legendaries and uniques receiving some changes as well, the T-Bolt's Will and Banished Lord Talisman's damage is also being reduced, but this is to allow other items to be a lot more viable. It's to all make sure it's all on a somewhat similar scale. And moving on to the Barbarian, it may seem as though we are receiving some nerfs along the way, but we all know that Charge, Hammer the Ancients and everything like that has been performing a bit all too well. Seems a bit too overpowered, so they're going to be reducing these down to allow other classes and their builds, as well as other potential viable Barbarian builds, to actually have an equal playing field as well. So as a Barbarian main, this is actually change I do welcome, and I completely acknowledge that yes, it was a bit too strong with the Hoe to Charge builds. But the good news is, across the board for every classes, including Barbarian, that they are looking to apply more meaningful class updates. So for an example, they gave us for Sorcerer is improving the skill tag update, and with Mastery skills, they're now going to be classifying these as core skills as well as Mastery. So if you have a stat such as core skill damage increase, this will now affect those Mastery skills such as Firewall and Meteor. And some amazing news for those minion fans out there. No, not the movie. I mean as in the Druids and the Necromancers. Your minions will now actually receive 100% of the player's stats, meaning they're going to be a lot more durable, but also their damage output is going to be substantially increased as well. Book of the Dead for the Necromancers is also receiving some updates and changes, with Reaper's Windup attacks now reducing one of your active cooldowns by 3 seconds. Cold Mage's attacks can now apply vulnerable for 4 seconds, as well as your Iron Golem Slam can also pull in enemies on its attack. Not only that, but skills and abilities for classes they're looking into modifying and changing the way it actually functions. So for the Druid, they use the Prime Lacerate as an example. So beforehand, it would heal you for 3% of your maximum life and doubles on critical strikes. Not only does it do that now, the first critical strike is guaranteed and deals 150% increased damage. And for Rogue with its Inner Sight, this is actually receiving a major change. So rather than it just filling up the gauge and you gaining unlimited energy for 4 seconds, this time round it's actually going to give you a 25% critical strike chance for 4 seconds, but also methods of being able to maintain it a lot more easily. And then lastly, for the hardcore players out there, they're actually going to be removing the Elixir of Death Evasion from the game, essentially making the hardcore a lot more hardcore, but in return they are making some changes to survivability, such as the Flame Shield for the Sorcerer, basically allowing it to proc more frequently and a much more safer threshold, so you're not going to be ending up getting one shot. Hopefully it's not as much. And that pretty much covers everything discussed in the Campfire Chat that happened this week. I just want to say, sorry this video has been released a lot later than I was hoping for. Unfortunately, with responsibilities with work and everything like that, I do struggle with time making these larger, more informative videos, but I did hope the information was super useful for you guys. And furthermore, before I forget, the actual experience that you're going to be earning in C4? Sorry, murdered my words there. What I was meant to say was, in Season 4, they're going to be increasing the amount of experience that you earn all across the board, so you're actually able to level up a lot more efficiently and able to delve into that endgame content a lot more sooner. And if you haven't had the chance to try out any of the endgame content, this is actually a good opportunity to hop back into Diablo 4. But let me know in the comment sections what you think about these updates, and are you planning on returning to Season 4 4. Do you think these changes are a vast improvement? What do you enjoy about the itemization changes? But also don't forget to drop a like to this video if you did find this information super useful, and even consider subscribing to my YouTube channel for more Diablo 4 content. I also stream over on Twitch as well. You can find me over at twitch.tv/Cuppa__T. And until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.